Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Run. The single command screamed through Julian's mind, overriding the burning agony in his lungs and the numbness spreading through his frozen toes. Rain lashed against the cobblestones of Sector 4 like bullets, turning the alleyways into slick, treacherous rivers of grime and oil. He didn't look back, he couldn't afford to. The heavy, wet thud of boots splashing behind him was enough to tell him that the debt collectors weren't just trying to scare him this time. They were hunting. Julian skidded around a corner, his shoulders slamming into the rough brick, tearing his cheap jacket. He was a nobody, a civilian beta trying to survive the collapse of his family's estate. But the pheromones flooding the air behind him were unmistakably alpha. Sour, aggressive, smelling of burnt rubber and violence. "Nowhere left to go, pretty thing?" a voice boomed, echoing off the narrow walls. Julian scrambled toward the main road, the lights of the upper city taunting him from the distance. He burst from the alleyway, stumbling directly into the path of a sleek, armored black sedan that screeched to a halt inches from his knees. The door flew open before the car had fully stopped. Julian flinched, expecting another thug, but the scent hit him first. It wasn't the sour stench of the chasers. It was overwhelming, like crushed cedar, cold steel, and the violent electricity of a thunderstorm. It forced Julian's knees to buckle, a biological submission he didn't understand, given he was supposed to be a beta. A figure stepped out, tall, imposing, dressed in a military-grade charcoal trench coat that cost more than Julian's entire life. "Get in," the man commanded. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. Julian stammered, looking back at the alley where three men were now freezing in their tracks, terrified by the mere presence of the newcomer. "I will not repeat myself, Julian." The use of his name froze Julian's heart. He looked up, rain plastering his silver hair to his forehead, and met eyes he hadn't seen in 12 years. One iris was a piercing, icy blue. The other, a shattered gold. Darius Thorne, the wolf of the north, and the boy who had promised to marry him when they were 6 years old. The interior of the car was a sanctuary of silence and leather. The rain was nothing but a distant drumroll against the reinforced glass. Julian huddled in the corner, shivering violently, water dripping from his nose onto the pristine upholstery. Darius sat on the other side, legs crossed, reading a tablet as if he hadn't just plucked a man from a gang execution. He hadn't aged kindly. He had aged dangerously. The soft boy Julian remembered was gone, replaced by a man carved from granite and war. A jagged scar ran through his left eyebrow, interrupting the beauty of his face with a brutal reminder of his rank as a prime alpha. "Drink," Darius said, extending a silver flask without looking up. "I don't drink alcohol," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's sweetened tea. Hot. Drink it before you go into shock." Julian took the flask with trembling hands. The metal was warm from Darius's grip. He took a sip, the sugar and bergamot flooding his senses, bringing a sting of tears to his eyes. It was the same tea they used to steal from the kitchens of the Vane estate, back before the scandal, before the bankruptcy, before Julian became a ghost in the slums. "Why?" Julian asked softly. "Why are you here, Darius?" Darius finally looked at him. The intensity of that heterochromatic gaze felt like a physical weight. "The Vane family debt has been acquired by Thorne Industries. You don't owe the syndicate anymore. You owe me." Julian's stomach dropped. "You bought my debt." "I bought you," Darius corrected, his tone devoid of emotion. "The syndicate was going to sell you to a brothel in the Red District. I interceded. Now you are my ward." "Ward?" Julian let out a bitter, shaky laugh. "We aren't children anymore, Darius. You're the High Commander of the Defense Force. I'm a failed noble living in the gutters. What could you possibly want with me?" Darius closed his tablet with a snap. He leaned forward, the scent of cedar and storm intensifying, filling the small space until Julian felt dizzy. I need a spouse, Darius said, the words landing like stones. The council is pressuring me to mate. They threaten to strip my command if I remain unstable. I cannot tolerate a stranger in my home, nor can I tolerate a political spy. I need someone who knows the rules of high society, who is desperate enough to obey, and who is a beta, unable to be affected by my rut. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as they swept over Julian's shivering form. You fit the criteria. A marriage of convenience. It was a cold, transactional offer. It shattered the fragile, childish hope that had flared in Julian's chest the moment he saw Darius. He wasn't saved because of their past affection. He was saved because he was a convenient tool. And if I refuse? Julian asked, gripping the flask. Then I open the door, Darius said calmly. And you can explain to the men back in the alley why you left. Julian looked out the window. The city was a blur of neon and darkness. He looked back at Darius, the man he had loved since he was 5, the man who was now looking at him like an asset on a spreadsheet. I'll do it, Julian whispered. Good. Darius leaned back, closing his eyes. We arrive in 10 minutes. Do not speak to the staff. Do not leave your room. And Julian, yes, don't look at me like that. The boy you knew died in the war. Do not go looking for him. The Thorn estate was a fortress disguised as a mansion. Cold marble, high ceilings, and an army of silent staff members. Julian was given a room in the east wing, far from the master suite. It was luxurious, filled with silks and velvets, but it was still a cage. For 2 weeks, they lived like ghosts haunting the same castle. They met only at dinner, seated at opposite ends of a table long enough to park a car on. The conversation was sparse, limited to logistics about the upcoming engagement gala. But something was wrong with Julian. It started as a low fever on the 3rd day. By the 10th day, his skin felt too tight. His senses dialed up to an excruciating frequency. The smell of the alpha in the house, Darius, was no longer just a scent. It was a gravitational pull. Every time Darius walked past him in the hallway, Julian's knees went weak, a slick heat coiling in his lower belly that terrified him. He was a beta. He had been tested at 12. He had lived 24 years without a heat. Stress, he told himself, splashing cold water on his face in the bathroom. It's just stress and the change in diet. He popped 2 of the suppressants he had bought from the back alley clinic years ago. He took them for anxiety, but they usually dulled his senses. Today they did nothing. The night of the engagement gala arrived with a thunderstorm that rattled the window panes. Julian stood before the mirror, dressed in a white suit that hugged his slender frame, the fabric shimmering like pearl dust. He looked ethereal, but he felt like he was burning alive. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Control it, he begged his body. Just get through the night. A knock at the door made him jump. Enter, he managed to choke out. Darius walked in, looking devastating in a black military dress uniform, metals gleaming against the dark fabric. He stopped in the center of the room, his nostrils flaring slightly. You're flushed, Darius observed, his voice sharp. Are you ill? Nerves? Julian lied, turning away to adjust his cufflinks. I'm not used to this world anymore. Darius crossed the room in 2 long strides. He grabbed Julian's chin, forcing him to look up. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He tilted Julian's head side to side, inspecting him. You smell. Darius frowned, leaning in closer to Julian's neck. Sweet, like vanilla and distress. Julian's breath hitched. He jerked back, breaking the contact. It's the cologne the stylist gave me. It's too strong. Darius stared at him for a long moment, the golden eye seeming to pierce right through Julian's lie. Finally, he straightened up, adjusting his gloves. Stay close to me tonight. The sharks smell blood in the water when a new player enters the court. If anyone touches you, tell me. I can handle myself, Darius. You couldn't handle 3 thugs in an alley, Darius said flatly, turning to the door. You are under my protection, Julian. That means you are mine to guard. Do not forget that. The ballroom was a sea of diamonds and malice. The social elite of the capital circled them, offering thinly veiled insults wrapped in compliments. Darius was a wall of ice at Julian's side, his hand resting possessively on the small of Julian's back. The heat from his palm burned through Julian's jacket, making the fever spike. Julian's vision was swimming. The lights were too bright. The scents of hundreds of other alphas and omegas were nauseating. He needed air. I need a drink, Julian muttered, pulling away from Darius's touch. Stay here, Darius ordered, distracted by a senator asking about border defenses. Just water. I'll be right back. Julian slipped away before Darius could stop him. He navigated through the crowd, his legs feeling like lead. He found a quiet balcony door and slipped outside, gasping as the cool, damp air hit his face. Well, if it isn't the little vain air. Julian froze. He turned to see Lord Silas, a rival alpha known for his cruelty and his hatred of Darius, leaning against the stone railing. I have nothing to say to you, Julian said, turning to leave. Silas moved with unnatural speed, blocking the door. He stepped into Julian's personal space, inhaling deeply. A twisted grin spread across his face. You're lying, aren't you? Silas whispered. That perfume. It's failing. I don't know what you're talking about. You're not a beta, Silas sneered, grabbing Julian's wrist. You're a late bloomer, an unregistered Omega, and you're going into heat right here at the High Commander's party. Let go, Julian cried out, panic seizing his chest. The touch of a foreign alpha made his skin crawl. Does Thorn know? Silas laughed, yanking Julian closer. Of course he doesn't. He hates liars. But I don't mind. I've always wondered what a high-born Omega tastes like. Silas forced his face into the crook of Julian's neck. Get off me! Julian screamed, his knee coming up to strike, but he was too weak. The biological imperative to submit to an alpha during heat was warring with his mind. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. Silas was ripped away from Julian with such force that his feet left the ground. He flew across the balcony, smashing into the stone railing with a sickening crunch. Darius stood there, but it wasn't the composed general. This was the wolf. His pupils were blown wide, eclipsing the blue and gold irises until his eyes were black voids. A low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest, a sound so primal it made the glass of the balcony doors rattle. His pheromones exploded outward, not the controlled cedar scent, but a suffocating blizzard of dominance and rage. You touched him, Darius snarled, his voice distorted by the alpha command. Silas coughed, blood trickling from his lip, looking terrified. Thorn, he's an Omega. He tricked you. He's in heat. Darius didn't look at Julian. He walked toward Silas, each step cracking the mosaic tiles of the floor. He grabbed Silas by the lapels and dangled him over the edge of the balcony. For stories up. I don't care what he is, Darius whispered, the deadly calm returning, which was far more terrifying than the shouting. I care that he is mine. He tossed Silas back onto the balcony floor like a rag doll. If I see you near him again, I will not just break your bones. I will dismantle your entire lineage. Get out. Silas scrambled away, vanishing back into the ballroom. Darius stood panting, his back to Julian. The air crackled with tension. Julian sank to his knees, his legs finally giving out. The heat was consuming him now, a tidal wave of fire. Darius, Julian whimpered. Darius turned slowly. The rage in his eyes faded, replaced by something darker, hungrier. He walked over and knelt before Julian, ignoring the rain that had started to blow onto the balcony. You hid this, Darius said, his voice rough. I didn't know, Julian sobbed, clutching his stomach. I swear, Darius, I tested as a beta. I didn't know until I was around you. Darius reached out, wiping a tear from Julian's cheek with his thumb. The contact sent a jolt of pleasure through Julian so intense, he arched his back with a gasp. Why didn't you smell me? Julian asked, his voice breaking. If this is real, why didn't you know? Because you were drowning in suppressor drugs and fear, Darius murmured. And because I forced myself not to look too closely. Because I knew if I found even a trace of this. He ran his hand down Julian's neck, resting over his scent gland. I would never let you go. Then don't, Julian whispered, looking up into the mismatched eyes of his childhood protector. Please, Darius. It hurts. Darius scooped Julian up into his arms as if he weighed nothing. Hold on. The bedroom was dark, lit only by the flashes of lightning outside. Darius kicked the door shut and locked it. He laid Julian on the bed, stripping off his own jacket and tossing it aside. The dynamic had shifted. There was no more contract. No more pretense. You understand what this means, Julian? Darius asked, hovering over him, bracing his weight on his hands. If I claim you now during your first heat, the bond will be permanent. You will be tied to me, my mind, my scent, my debts, my enemies. They all become yours. I never wanted anyone else, Julian confessed, reaching up to tangle his fingers in Darius's dark hair. Even when you left, even when you became the commander, it was always you. Darius's resolve shattered. He descended, capturing Julian's lips in a kiss that was desperate and bruising. It tasted of 12 years of longing, of suppressed rage and hidden devotion. Julian melted under him, his Omega instincts finally aligning with his heart. The heat was a blur of sensation. Skin against skin, the friction of silk sheets, the overwhelming scent of cedar and rain mixing with Julian's sweet vanilla. Mine, Darius growled against Julian's throat, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin over the gland. Yours, Julian breathed. Always. When Darius bit down, sealing the mark, the pain was sharp, but the rush of endorphins that followed was euphoric. A golden thread seemed to snap into place in Julian's mind, a connection that hummed with Darius's emotions. His fierce protectiveness, his overwhelming love, and the deep, quiet relief of finally coming home. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, casting a warm glow over the tangled sheets. Julian woke slowly, his body aching in a way that felt heavy and satisfied. He wasn't alone. Darius was sitting up in bed, his back against the headboard, reading a physical book. He was shirtless, the morning light highlighting the scars on his chest and the fresh scratches on his shoulders. Julian shifted, and Darius's attention snapped to him instantly. The cold, distant general was gone. In his place was a man who looked at Julian as if he were the most precious thing in the world. Water? Darius asked. His voice rumbled with morning rasp. Julian nodded. Darius reached over to the nightstand, poured a glass, and helped Julian drink. Lord Silas has been exiled from the capital, Darius said casually, as if discussing the weather. I made a few calls while you were sleeping. Julian lowered the glass. You didn't have to do that. I told you, Darius said, brushing Julian's hair back. I protect what is mine. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to the fresh bite mark on Julian's neck. And I have a lot of years of missed protection to make up for. Julian smiled, resting his head against Darius's chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. The contract was void. The debt was paid in full. And that is how the wolf finally caught the one thing he had been chasing all his life. If you enjoyed seeing Darius lose control to protect what he loves, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a childhood friend who treated you coldly to keep you safe? Or is communication more important than protection? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,